So many mysteries surround food. Food is substance of this planet that we take into our own body, which then becomes part of our body. Food also becomes energy to power our body's movements and our mind's consciousness itself. But here's a different kind of food mystery. A man walks into a doctor's office. He has a cucumber up his nose, a carrot in his left ear, and a banana in his right ear. "What's the matter with me?" he asks the doctor. The doctor replies, "You're not eating properly." Well, that was a food mystery easily solved, but others are more difficult. For example, if you eat equal amounts of pasta and antipasti, will you then be just as hungry as when you began? And last but not least, why does a typical American breakfast ask for only a day's effort from the chicken, but a lifetime commitment from the pig? Well, that last one wasn't funny to all of us, not as funny at least. Well, we joke about food because we take food so seriously, and each in our own ways. I grew up Methodist in small towns of Minnesota and Missouri, so I ingested whole the Midwestern Methodist codes about eating. First was the unstated rule about what to eat, and the rule seemed to be eat casseroles and potato salads and lime jello with little wrinkly bits of unidentifiable fruit quivering inside. And even more important than what to eat was the food rule to say grace, to appreciate the hands that prepared the food and all of creation. But my earliest ways of understanding food did not survive my first encounter with the cafeteria in Macalester College in St. Paul. Two things happened. First, the school cafeteria featured all kinds of bizarre foods I had never before seen, not normal food like I had grown up with, not tater tot hamburger casserole, not chicken a la king. No, these were strange foods with names like hummus and falafels and lentils and samosas and tortellini and tetrazzini and hobakjion and bibimbap, on and on and on. I was initially suspicious, but as I ventured into unfamiliar territory, plate by plate, I fell in love with food all over again. And the second thing that happened was not only did I encounter an incredible variety of food, I encountered an incredible variety of moral and ethical teachings about food. I majored in world religions, and so quickly learned that any world religion worth its salt pays a lot of attention to food's implications. Some, like Hinduism, focus on taking good care of your body, treating it as a temple, and not polluting that temple for the sake of passing pleasure. Some, like Islam, emphasize distributing food fairly and command the well-to-do to provide alms and food to the hungry. The Hebrew Bible declares that our religious food rituals, like fasting, are empty without deliberate acts of social and economic justice. Buddhist sutras teach that animals raised for food deserve just as much of our compassion as any other creature. Many indigenous traditions instruct us to not take any more from the earth than we need. In fact, there were hundreds of religious teachings I found about food, all of them causing me to question the adequacy of my prior assumptions. Now, in contrast, Unitarian Universalism is a faith that celebrates individual diversity when it comes to our religious beliefs and our spiritual beliefs and our ways of understanding the world. And so no surprise, just as there's no single UU answer to religious questions, there's no one UU way to eat, and there may well never be. Still, recently, more and more UU individuals and congregations have started to explore food's ethical dimensions. Reverend David invited me to join the conversation that you've been having at UUCF for at least a decade, because he knows that for 4 years I led the task force that engaged more than 400 UU congregations in exploring how our food choices relate to social and environmental issues, which led in 2011 to the entire denomination calling on UUs to consider the ethical issues involved, which led in 2011 to the entire denomination calling on UUs to consider the ethical issues involved in our food choices as a matter of conscience. And I went on from there to work for a hunger action network and a climate-focused nonprofit. I now work as the executive director of the UU Animal Ministry, and I'm helping to start a food studies minor at a Catholic university. So I've been thinking a lot about religion and food, and most of what feels useful to share from my thimble full of wisdom has to do with food in UU congregational life, not anyone's individual food choices. But in my sermon title, I did promise that I would touch on eating as a way of caring for yourself. So I'll begin with my best wisdom on that. If you try to live by at least some core UU values, like listening to the voice of conscience, heeding the results of science, tuning into spiritual teachings, committing to an open mind and loving heart, and so on, then I would encourage you, as best as you can, to eat whatever makes you happy. Really. But it's not as easy as it sounds, because research about human happiness has found that human beings are pretty bad at predicting what makes us actually happy. We mistakenly tend to believe that the more pleasurable experiences we collect, the happier we will be. But pleasure fades, and as anyone who has ever overindulged in pleasure can tell you, it can lead to regret. Happiness, on the other hand, is satisfaction that continues to be satisfactory. How would it be to eat for our own actual happiness, our joy, our fulfillment, our deep satisfaction that continues to satisfy? Imagine what it would feel like to eat a way that is closer to expressing your spirituality, closer to deepening it by honoring the values that you long to serve 3 times a day. But UUs make individual food decisions for lots of reasons, and I'm mostly here to reflect with you about how food in our UU congregations about food in our UU congregations specifically. Here are the 3 most powerful things I know about good food that apply to most UU congregations. First, good congregational food is, by definition, inclusive and welcoming. For example, welcoming to the estimated 8% of US children who have food allergies, including children who are not old enough to read signs about food allergies. Welcoming to the 9% of US residents who are vegetarian or vegan, not to mention the numerous part-way vegetarian folk like flexitarians, reducitarians, and pescatarians. Welcoming to the 20% or more in the US who are gluten-free, inclusive of people who are lactose intolerant, who are estimated to be more than 50% of the Latino and Hispanic community, 80% of African Americans and Native Americans, and 90% or more of East Asian Americans. Congregational food should be inclusive and welcoming to dietary needs of all the folks that a congregation aspires to serve. Agreed? Then great. So secondly, since different UUs have different food tastes and sensitivities and personal histories and cultural traditions and ethics and budgets and more, hold on to that story of the 3 ropes. When we see a UU eating food or preparing food or thinking about food differently than we would, we can see those differences not as something bad or weird about the other person or ourselves, but instead as opportunities to play together and learn from one another, to grow and change through mutual encounter, which is Unitarian Universalist congregational life at its finest. Third, week in, week out, congregations continually vote with their dollars to support food systems with certain values. Those values might be compatible with the congregation's vision of beloved community, or conflict with its vision, or be somewhere in between. And my advice is for congregations to vote with their food dollars in keeping with their own visions for a better world. But that can be hard to know how to do. For most UU congregations, there is a pretty straightforward way to start. And it's not an all or nothing way like a light switch that is either 100% on or 100% off. It's more like a volume dial that can be turned through many, many, many degrees and fractions of degrees. Each UU congregation controls its own dial and where it sets it, but it has to set it somewhere. So what I'm about to say may not be immediately obviously true, so please keep an open mind and listen for, say, 2 minutes. If you can't manage 2 minutes, 1 minute, before deciding whether you agree or disagree. Because based on my experience, where this dial gets set significantly impacts issues that most UU congregations care deeply about, like social justice, animal welfare, climate change, environmental sustainability, among others. What the dial is a control for how much a congregation financially enables and supports animal agriculture. Now remember, it's not a switch that's either on or off, it's a dial with limitless set points that a congregation can choose from. And it's a good news, bad news kind of situation. The bad news is that modern animal agriculture very negatively impacts many issues that UUs tend to care deeply about. But in a way that's also good news, because it means that this one dial provides congregations a way to affect many issues that UUs tend to care deeply about, not only positively, but simultaneously. Briefly, and without saying anything remotely graphic, here's why this is such a powerful dial for congregations to consider adjusting. Animal ag contributes at least as much to climate change as the entire transportation sector. That is, at least as much as all of the planes, trains, ships, semi-trucks, passenger cars in the world combined. That's not controversial. So, climate. And according to the UN, animal agriculture is the largest contributor to global water pollution, a leading driver of deforestation, and linked to 1/3 of global biodiversity loss. So, environment. Modern animal ag depresses health outcomes for surrounding communities, which tend to be lower income and communities of color. So, environmental racism. And animal ag increases the antibiotic resistance crisis, since a whopping 80% of antibiotics sold in the US are for use in animal agriculture, not in people. So, public health. The last thing I'll mention is that animal ag is an animal welfare nightmare. In the US, the percent of farmed animals who live their lives on factory farms is more than a certain percent. I'll let you guess what percent. The percent of farmed animals who live their lives on factory farms is, in the US, more than 99%. And almost all of the animal products that grocery stores push as alternatives to factory farmed, including cage-free and free-range eggs and certified humane meat, come from low-welfare factory farms, which may be better than even lower welfare industry standard factory farms. So, animal welfare. From climate to environment, to racism, to public health, to animal welfare, that's a very quick summary of some of the ways that this one dial provides congregations to affect many issues that many UUs deeply care about, positively, powerfully, and simultaneously. So, food matters, caring for self, planet, and all beings. Eating is a daily human delight with worldwide implications. Some people believe that you are what you eat, but actually, we are what you eat. You are affected by what I eat, and Earth's climate is what we all eat. In our chalice lighting, former UUA President Bill Schultz wrote that as UUs, we must hold the whole world in our hands. Well, every time we pick up a piece of food, we already do. So, in whatever way that you think best, I invite you to claim the power that is in your hands as a congregation, the power to bless the world. Shalom, salam, namaste, blessed be, and amen.